Good morning, INTERWEB. In the last video, I asked for some Qs, so I am here to deliver some As in what is going to become the traditional, unscripted, unrehearsed form. What is the best way to begin to create my conlang? I'm asking because when I try to, I don't know how to begin. So, no sarcasm here, but watch my videos. I like to think that they're really good for beginner conlangers. But beyond those videos, I would advise riffing off the languages you know and creating a naming language. So don't worry yourself with creating a hybrid Polynesian, Brazilian type language. That's pro level stuff, you'll get to it later. Go off what you know. A naming language is a language that only has enough words to name locations. So let's say you have a map and you just name a few mountains, a couple of cities, some towns, a river, a forest, that sort of jazz. This narrows the playground in a little bit because I think a lot of the time people get very daunted. They're like, oh my god, a language. Like languages contain hundreds of thousands of words and long grammars. Like where do I even begin? Forget all of it. Start with a naming language. Come up with some names for locations and derive it from there. Maybe one of your mountains is called Malakian, let's say. And maybe you might say, oh, the syllable kian could mean mountain. So maybe another mountain would be called like Olana Kian, for example. Maybe one of these mountains is particularly green, so maybe the word Olana could become green, and you kind of build from there. You are one of the 2 YouTubers I've seen who has mentioned stuff about Australian languages. Would you ever want to learn one? And if so, which one? That depends on what you mean by the word learn. If you mean become fluent or at least be able to hold some sort of conversation in it, then no, I really only have my sights set on Korean, Irish and Hausa. If you mean learn in the sort of language nerd sense, i.e. pick apart the grammar and become intimately aware of the grammar, then yes, of course, when I'm bored, I will often go to Walls, find some language I know nothing about and see if Wikipedia has anything on the grammar and go read that for a bit. There's a fun joke on the Conlangry podcast that is kind of related to this, and it goes, a linguist walks into a library on Friday, picks up a book on language X, returns the book on Monday and declares that they have learned the language. Learning for linguists and conlangers is very different from learning for the average person. I really don't understand the perfect aspect. Like, how can you have a present perfect? When responding to are you hungry with I have eaten dinner so I'm full, it seems to be in the past tense. Same thing with the past perfect. I had eaten sounds like the pluperfect. There was a point in time before it I ate. So I agree with nearly everything you said there. The only issue I have is the idea that the perfect is in the past tense. It's not in the past tense, it's in the past. And that might seem really pedantic, but it's a really important thing. We're not dealing with tense, we're dealing with aspect. And the confusing thing, particularly with the perfect, is that it partakes in both past time and present time at the same time. I have eaten, the eating occurred in the past, present consequence is I'm too full to eat. And the reason why we mark it as a present tense, I think, is because the overwhelming meaning behind a statement like I have eaten is that there is a present relevance. I have eaten because I'm full. I can think of no time where I would use the present perfect without wanting to convey meaning in the present moment. Hence, present perfect. With regards to the pluperfect, you are 100% correct. It is by definition the past tense and the perfect aspect all at once at the same time. And that's pretty tricky to get your head around, and this is what makes talking about tense, aspect and mood so difficult. You can't talk about one without talking about the other. So I had eaten is there was a point in the past before which I ate. Think of that as being like the tense part, but it has a subsequent consequence, and that's the perfect aspect. So I had eaten when John arrived. So the meaning behind that statement is when John was there, I was full. I know it's a tricky thing. Tense aspect mood is just, it's a bugger. You are aware that the perfect is also called the retrospective, right? And it has an opposite, the perspective. Yeah, you're totally right. Again, the perfect aspect, present relevance of a past event, is sometimes called the retrospective for obvious reasons by certain linguists. And it has an opposite, which is the perspective, which in English we can kind of get at with the construction, I am going to, I'm just about to, I'm about to, that sort of thing. I didn't include this in the video because 2 reasons. Well, 1, I thought there was already way too much terminology. And 2, and more importantly, by far and away the most common nomenclature is just perfect. Every time I've run into the retrospective and the perspective, it's kind of been as footnotes to perfect. So I figure go with what's common. What about all the other aspects? Where do they fit? Isn't there subdivisions of the perfective, like the encodative or something? So you're referring to this aspect tree that I had in the last video. Important point here is that I never intended to give the impression that this is an exhaustive aspect tree, as in all the aspects of human languages are on this tree. Rather, it was meant to be a minimalist, sort of like, here are the main aspects. So if you're a beginner, just deal with this, ignore Navajo. Pros, you go do Navajo all day long. So, but to answer your question specifically, yes, most aspects, if not all of them, can fit under either the perfective or the imperfective. There's a lot more under the imperfective because by definition we can say more about it. But you do have subdivisions, not really subdivisions, I suppose nuanced looks at the perfective. You have like the momentane, which treats an event as being instantaneous. You have the encodative, like you mentioned, which places emphasis on the beginning of an event. So an analog in English would be like, I started to read. And then you'd have like the terminative, which is the same, but places emphasis on the end of an event. So I read a book and finished, something like that. Is I will have used to work here correct English? In the future, I will have worked and ceased to work here. So I received so many comments to this effect. And this kind of caused a bit of an existential crisis for me, because I read a sentence like, I will have used to work here, and it's utterly ungrammatical to me. Like, I would never say that. It's completely alien to me. But so many people independently were saying this, and it was really weird. So here's what I did. First thing, I did a Google search. So the quoted Google search, and I found one instance on Reddit of this being used to convey future habituality, and I found one instance in a Quora comment. But outside of that, nothing. I asked all my friends about this, and without fail, 100% of the time, they all were like, that makes no sense. It's, I used to work here. And the interesting thing is, they didn't try and construct a future habitual. They kind of heard the words, I assume, they heard the words used to, and immediately were like, past, it's in the past, put it in the past, I used to work here. Which kind of bolsters this idea that English only has a past habitual and not a future habitual. But again, that's a small data set, it's not statistically significant. So what did I do? I turned to the great book Aspect by Bernard Comrie. I think this is like the 4th time I've plugged this book. It's fantastic. And had a look at what he had to say about it. Throughout this book, Comrie explicitly states that there is no future habitual in English. And I suppose the clearest example of which is in Appendix A, Section 2.1, Aspectual Systems of Individual Languages, English. Quote, English has 2 aspectual oppositions that pervade the whole of the verbal system, that between progressive and non-progressive, and that between perfect and non-perfect. In addition, in the past tense only, English has a separate habitual, using the auxiliary used to. And there's more quotes, like in chapter 1.2, he writes, quote, English, for instance, has a separate habitual aspect, though only in the past tense. Example, John used to work here. So what do we make of all this? The I will have used to work here construction is completely alien to me, it's completely alien to everyone around me, and it is not once mentioned in any of the books, and notably not in Comrie's book, which is like the granddaddy of aspect books. So what's going on here? Like, who's correct? Am I, my friends, and Comrie correct, or is the internet correct here? My gut feeling is it's both, as in standard English does not allow a future habitual, but perhaps there are dialects that do. If this is the case, I want you to let me know in comments. In classic Philip DeFranco style, I'm going to pass it over to you, and I'm going to ask, do you use a construction like I will have used to? He will have used to, we will have used to, specifically to infer future habituality. And if you do, I need to know, are you a native English speaker? And if so, where are you from? I want to get to the bottom of this. Anyways, those were some Qs, there were some As, great fun was had. I will see you after the next video for another round of Q&A. Until next time, Edgar out.